to kick things off, I'm going to end the polling and share the results there. Really interesting. So interestingly, that the number one answer, 29% of you have set a net zero target and are actively reducing carbon emissions now. 10%, another 10% of net, so 39% of the people here today have set a net zero target, which is amazing. And 28% measuring and reducing carbon emissions, 19% working on the plan now, 8% haven't started just yet, but hopefully by the end of the day you'll be chomping at the bit too, and 6% don't know. So that was really interesting. But welcome everybody today. So lovely to have you with us. Over 120 people here now, and the number keeps on going up. But we're going to get started because you're here, we're here. You might as well. Anyone who's running a bit late can join us when they get to it. So just to very briefly set the scene on what to expect from today's session. I'm welcoming. So hi, my name's Andrew. I am the Director of Community and Partnerships for Planet Mark. In a moment, I'll be handing over to our CEO, Steve Malkin, to do a little bit of a welcome and introduction. After that, we'll be hearing from the Lord Mayor, William Russell of the City of London. And then we'll be learning a bit more about our tour and what the Zero Carbon Tour is all about from our Head of Marketing, Claire Walmsley-Moss. Learning a bit more about what net zero even means from our Chief Operations Officer, Scott. And then one of the really important things we wanted to do was actually showcase what good looks like. It's not just about us. And we wanted to showcase a couple of great examples from within the Planet Mark community, including Rowlinson Knitwear and Child-Based Partnership, to tell a bit of their story on their journey on sustainability so far, and what they've done and what they're planning to do on this journey to net zero carbon. And then we'll have some time for Q&A. There is a dedicated Q&A tool. Please make use of it with dedicated questions that you want to ask us or Mark or Chris when they come up for their organizations. And then we'll have a bit of Q&A, and then we'll progress on to networking. So you're going to get the chance to interact with us and with each other in some sustainability networking afterwards. So please do stick around if you can. But without further ado, I'd like to hand across to Steve to say a few words and welcome everybody. Hello, Steve.
Hello. Thank you, Andrew. And thank you, everyone, for so many of you turning up today for our announcement for this session. I think that we've seen this unprecedented sort of interest, and it shows the level of demand for knowledge, a thirst for knowledge around net zero, and really sort of sets the scene perfectly for our announcement today about Planet Mark's Zero Carbon Tour, where we will be visiting cities, towns, communities, organisations and businesses across the UK, sharing our knowledge and information around net zero. We'll be launching our tour online in May with hosted events with organisations who've set net zero targets, bringing their communities together and their supply chains and their value chains and other organisations to hear more about what net zero means. So we'll be doing that online from May. And then in June, we'll be in person, running events in person, which will be the launch of the UK's first carbon battle bus, which we're really excited to be launching. And then we'll be taking a journey. It's fully electric, as I know you would know that, but just to be clear, it's fully electric coach carbon battle bus. We'll be going from London down to the Eden Project in Cornwall in time for the G7 conference. And then over the next tour and leg, it will be moving up through communities into London. Then ultimately, the battle bus will end visiting Glasgow for COP26. So we'll be touring the length and the breadth of the UK, both online and in person. And the purpose of the tour is really, really quite simple. It's to radically increase knowledge around net zero, to radically reduce carbon. So it's there as a tool and as a place where we, online or in person, will be sharing knowledge about what net zero is. And this is a really important piece. So we're helping organisations understand what is net zero, and we'll be providing a little bit of that today in terms of the definition. So what is net zero carbon? What does it mean to you and your business? And most importantly, how do you set net zero targets which are credible? And how do you set achievable plans to meet those targets? So credible targets with achievable plans. That's our goal. And it's an incredibly important time to have this conversation. We are partway into the decade of action, this critical period between 2020 and 2030, where we know once and for all we must tackle the climate crisis. By 2030, we know that we must be reducing our global carbon emissions by at least 50%. So the role, I suppose, of the tour, and perhaps also the Planet Mark, is to really help organisations tackle their carbon emissions and show them what role they will play in working together to get to those net zero carbon targets. And it's why we launched the Planet Mark back in 2013. In fact, it was April 2013 that we launched the Planet Mark 8 years ago. And we wanted to help organisations across the board relentlessly and sometimes radically cut their carbon emissions, be they SMEs or corporates, schools or hospitals, through the private and public sectors. We wanted to show that any organisation can cut carbon year on year on year. So the message is really, really clear within our community, where the success has been tremendous. They have been cutting carbon. Their success rate is 99.3% of all organisations who want to cut carbon can. And I think that's the message for today. If you want to cut carbon, you can. There's enormous social and environmental benefit, and there's also enormous business benefit. I know a number of you will be here today who have joined the Planet Mark, and I know a number of you will have set net zero carbon targets already, as we've seen by this poll. Actually, that's really, really enlightening, and it's really, really exciting. You'll be hearing from two of the organisations today, Chris Rowlinson from Rowlinson Knitwear and Mark Bird from the Child Based Partnership, about how they're tackling their net zero commitments. And it's interesting that both of those organisations are working with young people in the education sector. It's great to know that they're seeing their role in life and about how they're supporting their companies in getting to net zero for the future generations for whom they serve. We'll also be hearing from Andrew Griffith MP, the UK's net zero carbon champion. But first of all, I'm really delighted to welcome and thankful for his time today in the really, really busy calendar, the Right Honourable the Lord Mayor of London, Alderman William Russell, who heads the City of London Corporation, which is the governing body of the Square Mile. And I know very, very passionate about net zero and the role that organisations can take in achieving it. Lord Mayor.
Thank you very much, Steve, and thank you for your kind introduction. Welcome, everyone. Lovely to see you virtually. And I'm honoured to be speaking at the launch of the Zero Carbon Tour of the UK. This tour will highlight the crucial importance of business in reaching net zero. And Steve, wonderful to hear about the electric bus and the fact you're coming to London. So I welcome a visit to come and park the bus outside the Mansion House, where I'm doing this for you now, this speech. We'd love to see you, and we can have a bit more, social media around what great things are happening. But there's recognition now that the world has changed. Shifting to zero carbon is business critical, and no one can afford to be left behind. Climate has to be part of every financial and business decision. I commend Planet Mark for your partnership with Heart of the City in helping London SMEs to take effective climate action and to share their experiences and ideas with others. We recognise the urgency of the challenge in the City of London. Our climate action strategy commits us to having a net zero square mile by 2040, 10 years earlier than the national target, and to being net zero across our own organisation by 2027. That will create over 800 jobs, and we've committed to spending over £60 million to get to that space. I know our partner cities across the UK are making some similar commitments, and we're also doing all we can to ensure that financial and professional services are making the greatest possible contribution to reaching net zero. Greening finance and financing green. I think the digital and physical tour of the UK fits well with what I call the green brick road to COP26 in Glasgow this year. And I hope this tour will spread the message and inspire new actions across the UK. And I hope as many businesses as possible will take advantage of the opportunities on offer and kickstart the innovation which we will all need. So now I'm very pleased to hand back to Andrew Griffiths. Thank you very much for having me, Steve.
Thank you, Lord Mayor, and really much appreciated for your ongoing support. So I'm going to very quickly, in a brief moment, hand over to Claire, our head of marketing, to talk a bit more about the tour. But first, here's a little teaser trailer that will show you a little bit more about what we're doing.
Thank you, Andrew. Hello, everybody. As some of you would know, very few UK companies have set any carbon reduction targets or even have carbon measurement on their agendas. So by us taking the net zero carbon message out on the road, directly into the heart of regional businesses in their communities, both in the UK and globally, in support of the United Nations Race to Zero campaign, the tour will highlight how businesses can set their own net zero carbon commitments and implement credible action plans to actually achieve their targets. Through us telling the sustainability journey stories of our event hosts and Planet Mark members along the stops of the tour, we'll be reaching out to and inspiring business communities to do the same and take action. So, how's the tour going to work within the current COVID restrictions? The tour will be a hybrid tour, so part digital, part physical. The virtual tour will take place fortnightly from May, while the carbon battle bus, as we're affectionately naming it, will take to the road in June. In June, we'll hold a press day at various key landmarks in London. That'll be on the 9th of June. And we'll also have 2 days in London, 2 physical days, before we head down to Cornwall for the G7. We're taking part in a fringe event for G7, which leads us beautifully to our in-person regional event at the Eden Project, where our journey began, along with our partners Call F. The summer will see a mixture of digital and physical events, driven by the demand from you, our members, other interested parties, and additional routes may be added throughout the summer. Next slide, please. The carbon battle bus will be fully electric EV coach and it will be charged en route. It will travel the country to deliver a series of zero carbon events along the way, and more on that later from Andrew in terms of the details of what to expect from the events. The final physical route of the tour will be in October and November. As some of you may know, we host our annual Planet Mark Members Awards each October. So at the close of the awards this year, we'll all board the Zero Carbon Tour coach and head north, calling at multiple locations from farms, schools, trading estates, anywhere from London all the way through to Glasgow at COP26. When we're at COP26, we'll highlight and celebrate the steps taken by the business community in tackling carbon, and we'll call on government and regulators to support the changes needed. At the end of today's presentation, we'll share a link to the tour webpage. The webpage shows a global map of all of our Planet Mark certified members plotted onto the map. It'll also show the route the tour is taking, both digitally and physically. At each stop-off point, you can book in advance onto the events that are taking place in your region and follow the activities at each location. So more also on that from Andrew shortly. In addition to the route map, there's also a pledge platform and a pledge wall where you can pledge your commitment to reach net zero. Again, more detail shortly. So for now, I'd like to hand you over to Scott, who will give you some details on net zero.
Thank you very much, Claire. Can we go on to the next slide, please? So it falls on me to describe what a net zero is in the context of this tour. And I've got a couple of slides. The first one I want to just use to compare carbon neutral standard versus net zero standard. And what we've done here is put together a little bit of a table and comparing the two. So carbon neutral follows a PAS 2060 standard, where net zero carbon is a standard which is still developing. So we are following best practice in terms of what we are doing. So going through the comparatives, carbon neutral requires a measurement of scope 1 and 2. Scope 1 and 2 just to confirm what they are for anybody that's wants that clarification. Scope 1 is direct emissions from fuel combustion, so this is coal, gas, oil, biomass boilers, fleet vehicles, and any emissions from air conditioning units, the refrigerant gases from air conditioning units. Under carbon neutral standard and a net zero standard, both of these are covered. Scope 3 is all other indirect emissions, which involves goods and services procured by a company, business travel using non-fleet resources, waste generated in operations, and employees commuting, transport and distribution of goods, and any investment. So could we just go back to the other slide? Sorry. That's what's covered under these two schemes. Under carbon neutral, you're required to put together a plan for scopes 1 and 2. Under net zero carbon, you need to reduce your scopes 1 and 2 down to 0 or as close to 0 as you can get. Under scope 3, not required under carbon neutral standard, but reduces close to 0 as possible under the net zero standard. And then everything which is left over under net zero, so the residual emissions, will need to then be compensated by greenhouse gas removals from the atmosphere. So projects which take greenhouse gas out of the atmosphere. Next slide, please. So the summary of what net zero means to us is presented here. Scopes 1 and 2 to get down to 0. Scope 3 as close to 0 as possible in terms of indirect emissions, and then scope any scope through residual to be offset using an accredited carbon removal scheme. So that's the basis of the net zero that we are following as a business, which is very much in line with best practice and the emerging standards for net zero carbon emissions. Thank you. Back to you, Claire.
Thank you so much, Scott. Thank you for that. So hopefully that clarifies an immediate question you'll all have been having. Okay, well, what even is net zero? But now it falls to me to talk a bit about, okay, well, great. So that's what net zero is. How are we going to actually help? How is this tour going to help organizations and you wrap your head around that concept? How do you set a net zero target that is credible and authentic and has a plan to back it up? And so that's what this is all about, really. It's raising awareness, raising the game, really, for UK business and global business on this journey to net zero. So Where the bus stops, we're going to have all of these kinds of events and activations. The core event that will take place in each location is first things first is a Race to Zero information session. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the Race to Zero in a moment, which is a United Nations backed campaign to support organizations in the direction of net zero. So there'll be an information session which goes through things like we've just covered, to say what is net zero versus carbon neutral, and what is it versus climate positive, carbon negative, all of these kinds of terms that we hear, and then looking at what the criteria are to qualify as an organization for this Race to Zero, with a credible commitment and an ongoing commitment towards that journey. So that'll be about a 30-minute session. And then we'll have what we're referring to as a Sustainability Actions open mic. And the premise of this is essentially to use this tour as a platform to showcase what good looks like and where different organizations are along the journey. So it'll be a space where we ask organizations to come along and share their stories. What progress have they made so far? How have they done it? And what progress do they still have to make? What are their plans coming up? And we're going to be hearing from a couple of organizations in a short while to share a little bit about that and what that looks like from a practical perspective in their organizations. What are their sustainability journeys to help start that inspiration today? We're also going to have lots of examples of ways to get involved and guest speakers in different locations. We'll mix things up a little, different places, but that's the core. The core is that we'll have an information session followed by an open mic, followed by obviously networking, as we are doing today, because connecting with one another and supporting one another as a community of organizations moving towards net zero is the best way that we can do it, because we can all learn from one another, learn from what goes well, what doesn't, etc., etc. So that's the core, and that's about a 2-hour event, and that means we could potentially be visiting multiple locations in one day doing that kind of event. In larger locations or locations where we know we've got a lot of people coming and who really want to sort of dive into the detail of it, we'll also be putting on free net zero carbon essentials workshops. And these are 3-hour workshops, which we're working towards CPD accreditation for, with the idea that you will be able to learn right the way through. How do you make a pledge? How do you plan out what year you should be targeting based on the percentage carbon reductions you're going to have to aim for each year in order to have a 2030 target or a 2035 target or a 2025 target? And then how do you come up with your plan for the first year, for years 2 to 5, for years 5+? What does that look like? And how do you then go on and measure and report against that progress year after year? So it's an essentials workshop to understand the journey to net zero carbon emissions. And then the final one that we'll do in various locations are, again, all of this is free, carbon clinics, which will be appointment only, one-on-one sessions with some of our team to ask your questions about how do we measure carbon, how do we reduce our carbon, and sort of have that more intimate conversation where we can help you on a one-on-one basis, very specific to your specific challenges and specific industry. So that's what you're going to look out for, and this will all be forming part of our overarching goal and our overarching call to action, which it was great to see the results of that poll, is to accelerate this race to zero. What is the Race to Zero? What does it mean? If you haven't heard about it, you're going to hear it you're hearing about it now. So I was going to say you're about to hear about it soon, but this is the big push, and we'll be hearing in a few minutes from Andrew Griffith, who is the net zero business champion for the UK, and he's going to share a little bit more about it, so I don't want to spoil it too much. But essentially the fundamental of the Race to Zero campaign, which is a UN-backed initiative to form the largest alliance of credible climate action from all kinds of organizations, whether it be companies, cities, regions, universities, etc., etc., etc. And the Race to Zero is formed of 4 key criteria. The first is pledge. So at head of organization level, you pledge a target to reach net zero emissions as soon as possible, but certainly before 2050. Then you come up with a plan. Within 12 months of joining, you have to set an interim target representing your fair share of a 50% reduction of your carbon emissions by 2030 at least. And then you've got to take immediate and meaningful action towards achieving net zero. So you've got to be doing it now. It's not just about setting a long distant target. It's about really doing it now. And then the fourth piece of criteria is that you have to publish. And this is about committing to reporting your progress on an annual basis by publishing your targets against on a public platform, which there are various sort of options, but Planet Mark members will be pleased to hear that you already meet several of these criteria merely through your membership with Planet Mark and by working with us. So that's what the Race to Zero is all about. Again, if you have questions about any of this throughout, put them in the Q&A tool and we will get to them afterwards. But now I just want to hand over briefly to one particular organisation, Child Base Partnership, and we're going to hear from Mark Bird, who is the Health, Safety and Environment Director of Child Base Partnership, which is one of the UK's largest nursery groups, to tell you a little bit more about their journey so far, as an example of what good looks like, really, and this your first flavour of a sustainability open mic. So, Mark, over to you.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Yeah, hi. So I'm the Health Safety Environment Director for Child Base Partnership. We are unique amongst our sector as an employee-owned business, which strangely, Chris from Vans and Knitwear is also employee-owned, which you'll find out in a second, which is just one of those weird things that's happened. And also we are unique amongst the sector in having a net zero by 2030 target that we set with the Planet Mark back in we formally agreed it in March 2020, and then a little thing like the pandemic happened not short after that, and got in the way of all our plans. We take our work within the environment space very seriously. We go to the next slide, Andrew. Sorry. We like to be at the forefront of whatever it is we happen to be doing. So, that's including childcare, but also, menus and sustainability, recruitment, the whole kit and caboodle. So it's very much something we're trying to achieve and trying to push forwards. It's built into our sustainability, is built into our curriculum via something called Eco Schools. So this is a government funded via Keep Britain Tidy scheme. We have 42 green flag nurseries amongst the 44 locations, and the other 2 are imminent to go green flag. And we've got, of those 42, 14 have 2 flags, and some by the end of this year will actually have 3 flags. So we'll just keep sort of gathering these flags. We also have our menus accredited by Food for Life served here. So the food has a high level of efficacy from a sustainability perspective baked in, if you exclude the pun, so that we have dedicated meat-free days. We've consciously opted to have higher welfare, sustainably produced produce, just for the purpose of dovetailing that in with our operations. For my sins, I also look after procurement. So from a supply chain perspective, it's obviously one of the big challenges for net zero, is getting a supply chain on board. But handily, there's more and more companies, some of which are actually watching right now as part of the Planet Mark community, who it just makes sense to migrate your business, to companies of like-minded ilk, and being part of the community really helps with that. We've recently signed up with Roadkill, who are amongst the Planet Mark attendees for our pest control, for example, and existing network as well. So one of our main supplies companies have recently become accredited with Planet Mark. Our first aid company are, and I'm constantly pressuring those that aren't to do that, and that's the kind of come with us on that journey. And that's the same within the sector. So my sector is very strange because there's a nursery with 30 employees and 45 children. That's all they do. And then there's all the way up to the sort of really large groups that have got 350 nurseries. But by and large, most are, up to say 10, and from 1 to 10, really odd in terms of the scale. They have the same challenges we all do, but they just have them in different volumes and different levels of control. So we're trying to get our sector to come with us on the journey. So I co-founded with a lady called Cheryl Hadland at Tops Day Nurseries. You may remember Cheryl. A few years ago, she banned the glitter in her nurseries, and it made national news. So Cheryl was a huge advocate for this. She operates a group that's got about 8 or 9 nurseries in the south of the country, and she is lobbying government strongly via an all-party parliamentary group, and then us, along with others in our sector who are similarly minded, are trying to push this forward within the sector. We're lobbying a DFE and the Ofsted in terms of including it in our governing body's documentation. I think, as Steve might have mentioned, it's not something we're required to do. It's very much over and above, but in my view, it's something that's going to come to us via customers in probably about 3 years now, maybe 4, as they start to have children. There's the age group that are really angry about this and making lots of noise, potentially in protest, but also just generally just like, why isn't this being dealt with quicker? Are going to start having children, and they're going to come into the sector and come into us from a business perspective, and we're going to need to be catering for it, and I want to be doing that in an authentic way. So starting our journey back in 2016 to get to where we are in 2021, we have that legacy of ethical business. So if you've got any questions at the end, then put them up by all means. I'm very keen on sharing anything that may be of value to anybody here. I'm an open book in that respect. But otherwise, I'll hand over to Andrew.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you so much for sharing. I'm going to actually, before I hand across to Chris to tell us a bit about Rowlandson Knitwear, I've just been informed that Andrew Griffith is in the house, so to speak. I'm delighted to welcome Andrew Griffith, who is he's an MP of Arundel and South Downs, and he is the UK's net zero business champion. So he can tell us a little bit more about why the race to zero is so important, and what UK business can do to play its part. Over to you, Andrew.
Thank you, Andrew. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you, fam.
Fantastic, good. Well, look, actually, I've been in the house since the very beginning and heard all of the excellent information about this initiative and that what everybody's been doing and Steve's original setup to what we're trying to achieve. This is a incredibly important moment in time. Unique is an overused word, but I think you're all aware of the significance of COP26, the urgency for the need of climate action, and the imperative of UK leadership to make a success of both our G7 presidency, of which climate is a key part, and COP26 itself. So if there's ever a moment in time for businesses to act, then now is the time. And it's fantastic to hear about your literally physical manifestation of a race to zero. I've got this image of this bus traveling through every part of the United Kingdom on its way to COP26, and everywhere it goes in its wake, Pied Piper-like, people are following up and making their pledges. And that really is incredibly important. I mean, we're all here today because businesses are successful forces of enterprise, of social change, of dynamism. It's business that's created longer lives, better quality lives, solved many of the world's problems. And it is the ferocious problem-solving power of business that is going to solve the climate crisis. There's a job to do with our world leaders when they turn up and have their photos taken in front of the flags, and business actions and pledges can absolutely underpin their willingness to make those really ambitious targets. But it's ultimately on all of us to take the pledge, to act, as I say, and then to show and tell others, because the biggest challenge right now, I think, and you're going to step right into this, Void, is the practical ideas, the ability to learn from others as people go on this journey. So everyone's bought into the idea of taking action on climate. As of today, we have well over 30 of the top 100 FTSE companies who've already signed up to the Race to Zero. the backdrop, I apologise for my floating head, but the backdrop behind me is the government's SME Climate Hub, which is where every UK business can make their own pledge, fully compatible with everything that Planet Mark is doing, and very grateful for the support of the IOD and what they are doing as part of a broad coalition of us all moving together. So think of this as another kite mark that businesses can participate in. And there's also, it's replete, and it will become more so as we add in more examples and links to things like the resources that you are curating. It's also a brilliant one-stop shop for the really simple actions that we can all take. And it is often the challenge is getting people to start on this journey, to not let the perfect be the enemy of the good, to do the simple things that often save money every day as well. So they're often the same old housekeeping things that we all know we should be doing. And I really urge you and congratulate you, and I'm here to support you on the incredibly important 6 months ahead. So I'm sorry I'm not physically with you today. I'm going to come and see the battle bus. Try keeping me away when it's at a location near me, or even maybe not, and I'll come to you. But thank you so much for letting me say a few words. Congratulations on this initiative. I'm delighted you're off, and the very best wishes with everything that you're doing over the coming months.
Thank you so much, Andrew. We really appreciate you being here with us, and thank you for all that you're doing as well to sort of really drive this this mission forward and accelerate the race to zero with us. And we thoroughly look forward to being on that journey with you all the way to COP26 and beyond. So thank you so much. Now we're going to hear from another great example of a business doing fantastic things. We're going to hear from Chris Rowlinson of Rowlinson Knitwear. He is the Business Improvement Director there. Rowlinson Knitwear create affordable and durable uniforms for schools and for corporates. So welcome, Chris. I'm just going to quickly make sure that I spotlight you. Here we go. There you are, Chris.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. So we just move on to the first slide. Thank you. So as Andrew mentioned, yeah, with the leading UK supplier of school uniform garments, we became employee-owned, same as Charbase, back in 2015. And last year we became a B Corp, scoring 107 points, which is sort of the highest scoring B Corp in the north of England and Scotland. Sustainability is really at the core of who we are, and our purpose is to grow for the greater good. So the ambition is really that as we become a bigger organisation, we can affect more and have more positive influence on the world around us. And in terms of sustainability, for us, it's acting responsibly today, so we can protect the future generations. And obviously, with us being in school uniforms, an obvious sort of connection there to that. Next slide, please. So in terms of some actions we've taken so far to reduce carbon, I've listed a few down here, but we became Planet Mark certified, and we've been certified now for 3 years. And in that time, we've been able to achieve around a 50% reduction in our carbon emissions. And from the first year we became Planet Mark certified, as well as the site in Stockport and business travel, we've also included the transportation of goods, so from port of origin offshore all the way through to our customers. So what we learned early on is that's a very big part of our emissions. So that's why we were really keen to sort of include that from the beginning, so we could understand that and reduce that as much as possible. And linking into that, more recently we've worked with Planet Mark to certify one of our independent tier 1 suppliers, which is Totex in Egypt. So they're now Planet Mark certified. So obviously that gives us the measurement and the insight into their emissions. We've also moved to a community-based recycler in Manchester called Emerge. So 80% of our waste is now recycled through them. We, as a sort of more as a stepping stone to net zero, we are a carbon neutral company with carbonneutral.com, but that doesn't change the desire to get to zero. It's more of a bridging gap and to sort of offset in the meantime whilst we're working on that track to as close to zero as we can get. We also hold annual climate crisis days, so we've held them back in 2019 and 2020. So they're full days where we close the business from a training perspective, and we dedicate the time to workshops, learning, working with each other, brainstorming new ideas, and just a great sort of team building day, really powerful day, and it's certainly been a catalyst for a lot of the initiatives and ideas that we've picked up and run with since then. We have a dedicated sustainability team and strategy, so I think that helps drive the direction. We've got kind of a long-term plan, and we've got people dedicated to delivering that plan. On a more practical level, we installed solar PV system last year. So we now generate twice as much electric as we use. Obviously, any over-generation going back into the grid. And then other things like LED lighting throughout the building, optic sensors, motion sensors, so equipment and lighting is only being used when it's necessary. And we've also now either gone to fully electric or plug-in hybrid electric vehicles for the fleet cars that we have. And as part of that, we have various charging stations outside, which are also free for all colleagues and visitors to use, even on non-company vehicles, to try and encourage and progress the transition to electric vehicles. Moving on to the next slide. Okay, so our next steps and sort of what's coming up next. We're going to sort of continue working with our tier 1 suppliers. So we have 4 tier 1 suppliers in total. So the ambition is by the end of next year that all 4 of those will be Planet Mark certified. Therefore, we'll have the measurement of their carbon emissions. And we'll then, as we've now already started with Totex, work on reducing their carbon footprint. And that'll mean a lot of working in partnership with them, which we do across all aspects of their businesses anyway, but also actually stepping up and investing in their organisations for them to be able to become, a much lower sort of carbon footprints, and over time, possibly where again we can't get to zero, offsetting those emissions, because in reality, a good proportion of their emissions are effectively ours. So that's something we're keen to push back up the supply chain. A couple of other things, we're rolling out a carbon literacy program for all colleagues. So that's 8 hours worth of training that we'll be delivering over Zoom during the course of this year in groups of 12. So the ambition there is to get between 80 and 100% of colleagues through that training. And as part of that, we'll be assessing people's personal carbon footprints. So understanding home travel situations, and importantly, what we can do to help them to reduce that. And we're going to be putting some money to one side to enable us to help and support with some of those initiatives that they might want to take forward. And I think the theme with all of this and what we found throughout is, from a business point of view, is without exception, I think all of these initiatives, whilst they're great for the planet, and that's the primary reason for doing it, they certainly deliver in terms of cost savings. Even if there's an initial investment up front, longer term, there's definitely payback. Final couple of things, we're actively working with our council, Stockport Council, to help and support and encourage change in the community, and working closely with them. And we're also more recently looking to switch, all being well, our pension funds into more sustainable net zero businesses. So sort of considering where our money's being invested, from an environmental perspective, rather than just the yield you might get from a traditional pension. Over to you, Andrew.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Chris. That was absolutely fantastic to hear. And sorry for the slides were taking, I changed them on there, and they would take about like 10 seconds to come through on here. So apologies for the delays there. But thank you so much for sharing that. I'm seeing comments in the chat from so many people who are being inspired by what you shared as a fantastic case study for us all to learn from, which is, you know, ultimately what this is all about. So I'd like to hand back to our CEO Steve, just to say a few final words and wrapping up before we jump into some Q&A and then the networking. So over to you, Steve.
Thanks, Andrew. I'd like also just to thank our speakers at this moment in time. So thank you to the Right Honourable Lord Mayor of London for joining us, for Andrew Griffith MP joining us, and from Mark and from Chris. Thank you. So we kind of heard the sort of top level stuff around the urgency, but also here there's a big piece around the sort of the practical nature of getting to net zero, which Mark and Chris have so brilliantly put forward. And we know we'll be visiting both Rowlandson and Childbase as part of our tour, be it online or the battle bus. And we'd like you to join us at, and visit them too, because as Donald said, it was possible to do a walk around and see, net zero in practice, which is really what this is about. So you've heard about our tour, and just to, the re-emphasis on the purpose of the tour is to radically increase knowledge and action to radically reduce carbon. I know it's a bit cliche, but we have to do it, and it starts actually with understanding what net zero means to you and your business. And our goal together should be to enable every organisation or business or institution, community or city around the UK and beyond to set a credible net zero carbon target and a plan to support it. It's all in line with the Race to Zero, which is really important, the UN-backed programme. So we know that credibility is there and it's backed by the right type of criteria around the definition of net zero. And if we're informing and mobilising companies across the UK, we will be taking action and we will be driving change, which is what we're all about. I think it's exciting, it's challenging, but it's also really, really imperative that we take action now. Both from a social and environmental perspective, as Chris said, look, it's about doing the right thing. But it's also helping the UK meet its net zero targets. It's helping the world meet their net zero targets, our net zero targets. But there's a commercial imperative here too, which is really important to understand. And we haven't gone too much into the detail here, but I just want to sort of share this with you. If an organisation that you're working with is setting a net zero carbon target, it means that they will be measuring their scope 1, their scope 2, and their scope 3 emissions. So if your customer is setting a net zero carbon target, and they're starting to measure their scope 3, they will be naturally turning to you as an organisation and supply chain, as Rowlandson is working with Totex. Others will be coming to you and saying, we need to understand what your carbon footprint is. We need to know that you're measuring it. We need to know that you're reducing it, how you're doing it, and actually have you set meaningful net zero carbon targets. But the first thing you must be doing is you must be measuring and reducing your carbon, and then be looking to be setting these net zero targets. So it's really important that we are doing this together and that it is understood. Net zero actually is creating a significant shift and urgency and action in around the measuring, reporting and reduction of carbon emissions. And that supply chain piece, that value chain piece, you need to understand your role and your place within it, because we'll all be doing it together. And so I want to leave you with perhaps just a few takeaways. Andrew, so if we could just do the next sort of slide. So what can you take away from today? I hope you've understood a little bit more around what net zero carbon is and what it might mean to you. I hope that it means that in understanding that the key issue here is to set a credible pledge and to get started. It really is about getting going. If you hear what Chris and Mark have said, they set their sort of targets, they got underway with a credible target and plan to take action. The other takeaway is that we would love you to, and I know it's in the chat, we would love you to host us. We'd love to host online events with you, and we'd also love to visit you in person with this marvellous electric battle bus, probably also because we're going to need to charge it up Yeah, so, you know, can you help us with the charger, and we'll come. So please contact Nikki, who's our tour manager, with the contact details here if you'd like to host us. And thirdly, you know, we are looking for support for our program. Yeah, so if you think there's a way that you could support the Carbon Tour, the Battle Bus, to keep this on the road, to take it to every part of the UK, to every organisation and community and city where we need to be sharing this knowledge, sharing our knowledge together that we've heard today, it's really quite critical at this moment in time. So could you contact us and talk about how we can do this together? Because that's the critical bit. You know, we want you to jump on board, metaphorically and literally, onto the Battle Bus. We want your help with taking our tour far and wide, and because the only way we're going to get to net zero is by doing it together. So thank you for attending today. I hope there's loads and loads of questions. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Steve. So that, you know, and that's it. So if you've got any questions for us, I've seen a couple come into the Q&A already. And whilst you're doing that, I'm going to roll one more poll, which I've tongue-in-cheek called "All Aboard," because we'd love to just get your feedback on, you know, are you on board for this? Does this sound good? Was it what you expected coming along today? And whether or not you'd like to get involved proactively or just come along to one of our events on the road as we go. So let's answer that. And then in the Q&A, the most common question has been, how do I get you to come to where we are? And you know, are you going to stop off here? Are you going to stop off there? To which the answer is, we'd like to. One way or another, this is going to be a hybrid tour. So we'd like to get there in person if we can. And if we can't, we'd like to get there virtually. You can reach out to Nikki. And also we're going to be creating a form, actually, for those who want to host an event. And we'll send out in the links afterwards a form which you can fill in, just letting us know a bit about the venue and the location that you could potentially have us come to, whether or not there's a charging point, and all of those sorts of practical things that we'd love to find out about. And one of the questions that came from Matt Sal was, are members able to invite clients and suppliers to the Battle Bus tour so that we can get them involved? To which the answer is yes. I mean, we actively encourage that. So absolutely, yeah, definitely. Diana asked if is the Battle Bus also visiting Planet Mark partners? We would certainly like to get in touch, and we're planning out the route. We're focused on the Cornwall to London route, kicking off on the 14th of June right now, and then we'll be building that route out across the country and doing different legs into different parts of the country, both virtually and physically. Will there be any places to ride with you all the way to Glasgow from Philippa there? Good question. I don't know, maybe we should be auctioning off seats on the bus to come on the road. I'm not sure. And Donna asked what we need to do in Windsor and Maidenhead to get you to stop over with us, which hopefully I've answered. So there'll be a form which you can fill in to let us know a bit more about what you can do in terms of hosting. But the overarching point here is we want to do whatever we can to get to as many people as we possibly can. Thank you for getting your votes in on the poll there. It looks like there's an overwhelming majority who are saying count me in, which is really, really exciting. So I'll end, 50% of people have voted, so I'll leave it up as we're going. Any more questions from people either in the chat or I can't see any in the chat, but if you've got any questions, we're here for you. If you've got a question for us or for Mark, are you sleeping on the bus? We could provide a great breakfast. Thanks, Diana. I mean, we're going to need a good breakfast. That's for sure. I don't think we will be sleeping on the bus, although I would defer that question to Nikki. Certainly not planning on it, but if we have to, you know, that's what we'll do. Awesome. Well, if there aren't any further questions, I'm going to end the polling there and share the results. So just so you can see, I'm not lying about it being an overwhelming majority. You're saying, count me in, let's get involved. So please do stay for networking if you can, because this is a great opportunity. You know, as we've just heard from two fantastic organizations doing great things, this is your opportunity to hear from even more and to connect with one another and learn from the wisdom of the community in terms of what's already working, what are people planning on doing, and how are people playing their part in this race to zero. Because ultimately, whilst the language around it is that it's a race, this is a collaborative race, right? Because this is a race which we all have to run together, because we either all lose or we all win together. So this is all about playing our part, supporting one another over that line. Thank you, Ian. Visit us at lunchtime. We have a great chippy next door. Gotta love a good chippy. So we will certainly do that. So I'm going to place a link into the chat there. And it's going to be on the screen as well. There we go. I mean, if you can type all of that out, but it's in the chat. That is the link for the networking. I'm going to hang around here for a little bit for people to get. Poran, yes, there will be a recording of this available that we will circulate via email. So get over onto the networking if you can. We would love to have you there. It's going to have a little spinning wheel initially, because we're on the same account, so we've got to jump across. So I'm going to give it a couple, about a minute and a half or so for people to grab that link. Get over there. Have the the loading symbol will be there and going. And in just a moment, I will jump off. I'll jump off and kick off the networking. So I'm going to put it into the chat again. All right, everybody, we'll see you over there in just a moment. We're going to, in fact, I'm going to be a little bit silly. Let's have a little bit of countdown music. Oh, come on. I've got to stop sharing here first. All right, who's coming across? We'll be there in 30 seconds. You know it's 30 seconds because now... Who's going to be over there? All right. Okay, guys. I'm going to close this event. We'll see you over on the other side in just a moment.